Now, I am really excited to introduce our speaker to you. I'm going to be joined in conversation by Dr. Mary Hemphill. Dr. Hemphill is a leadership expert and coach, as well as a K-12 educator and administrator, author, and motivational speaker. She is a leadership development coach with over 15 years of professional experience as a teacher, administrator, state director, and university professor. Mary understands the importance of fusing education, empowerment, and leadership together as she works with learning and working communities and speaks to audiences across the country. Dr. Hemphill holds a PhD in leadership studies from North Carolina A&T University and currently teaches as an adjunct professor at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. So go Tar Heels. Dr. Hemphill is also the CEO and founder of the Limitless Leader, a company that helps individuals ignite the leader in themselves so they can better serve their community, company, and personal career. So welcome, Dr. Hemphill. We're so happy to have you with us today. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our audience about your background before we move on into questions?
Meg, you did a wonderful job. I'm just so happy to be here. This has been an amazing conversation today. So just excited about the topics that are being elevated. And thank you for having me.
Thank you. Oh, so happy to have you. Okay, so let's jump in here. Let's talk a little bit about some of those global mega trends that are impacting leaders most in today's climate, especially if we're coming at this from a global perspective. What are some of the major impacts?
Absolutely. When we talk about some of these global megatrends, what we need to understand is that we're breadcrumbing into what are planting seeds for 22nd century success. So when I look across our globe and really think about what's impacting leaders and how is it impacting how our employees and how our organizations show up, one of the biggest trends is digital transformation and connectivity. So in March of 2020, as we started to think about, okay, what would it be like to work from home? Well, now we're living from work, but that means that we're redefining what that virtual workspace looks like. That means we're asking questions from our entry-level managers to our C-suite leaders about what true, authentic online engagement looks like. And then companies have really had to think about branding. How do we continue to show up and really make an impact in this online space where we have access to billions of individuals? So really thinking about when it comes to that transformation as well, how do you bring in your digital natives to your digital immigrants and your digital veterans and really start fusing those things so that everybody is really being able to show up? So that's the big overarching trend. The second, right after that, I believe, is building and retaining top talent. What we've seen is that those leaders who are really able to lead through disruption and really make sure that they're bringing their teams, ensuring that they're really focusing on organizational goals, mission, and values, those have been the leaders over the past iterative 2 years who've had the best success. But what we also know is that we're going through the Great Recession. Companies are only able across our globe to fill about 47% of those leadership roles when it comes to really matching talent, expertise, perspectives, and background. And so really thinking about how do we recruit and retain the best talent has been huge. And last but not least, one of the biggest global megatrends is ensuring that as an organization, do we have the language, the resources, and the support to ensure that our employees and that our company are showing up when it comes to civil, civic, and equality movements? What's the language around that? How are we preparing our employees? And then when it comes to being client facing, are we making sure that our organization are standing on those values so that we have the appropriate opportunities to be successful for all?
Oh my gosh, I feel like you just hit us with a mouthful, but that is wonderful to hear. You're right. And I mean, I like the idea of kind of breaking it down into these three top areas. And I've never heard the terms before, but thank you so much for sharing that about, being a digital native or being a digital adopter. It's completely different. I started working from home 3 years ago, so a year prior to the pandemic, and had that time to kind of get my feet wet, figure out what was working, what wasn't. And that is entirely different from moving into a work from home or remote field, like in the middle of a pandemic. It is
Absolutely.
totally different, right?
It is. It truly is. And especially when you think about engagement, because on top of the global pandemic, we've also had the well-being of our employees. And so I always coach leaders and I say, make sure that your company is 40% human doing and 60% human being. Every individual has been impacted some way, whether positively or negatively. So if we just keep thinking, okay, more Zoom meetings or more agendas or more company organizational initiatives and programs. No, we need to really step back and make sure we're elevating our individuals, make sure that we have amazing employee resource groups, cultural outreach initiatives, and that we're taking time one-on-one or in small groups to not ask, how are you okay, but to ask, are you feeling supported? Do you have the resources that you need technologically to really be able to ensure that your duties and responsibilities are being met?
I love that reframing so much because it's the pressure to say, "Oh yeah, I'm fine, everything's okay." I don't think it's uniquely American, but it is definitely very prevalent here.
Absolutely.
And so I love that idea of kind of reframing the question into, are you feeling supported? Because that makes a
Yes.
very good natural transition into, okay, you're not. What can we do to support you better?
Critical. That's critical. And then that engages in conversation. So we really need to really step back when we think about that digital transformation as well and kind of move away from performance evaluations to really human beings in terms of how are they doing on the continuum of well-being, emotionally and mentally. How can we bake some more resources into our company resources and into our HR programs as well?
Yeah, of course. And just as a reminder to all y'all who are watching right now, if you have questions that you would like to ask Dr. Hemphill, please feel free to put them into the group chat. It's on the right-hand side of your screen. We would love to get to surface some of your questions as well. All right, so Dr. Hemphill, we talked a little bit about kind of those mega trends. Can you explain some of the key principles when it comes to that inclusivity and cross-sector collaboration that is necessary right now in the 21st century and moving forward?
Absolutely. So when we think about this reframing that's happening, lots of organizations are really starting to think about, okay, what do successful diversity, equity, and inclusion programs and outreach look like? And when we start to think about that, there's three tenets that I think about with inclusivity as well as collaboration. And that is that inclusion is true respect, true reflection, and true expectation. So I always coach leaders and really think about when I go into organizations, what is the true definition across the board of inclusivity and collaboration? And it's where every single individual stakeholder and client can be respected, reflected, and expected. When we start to think about this shift, what we know is that there's some antiquated traditional language around diversity that says diversity is really being able to be invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance. So let's step back and let's ask some questions. Who's doing the inviting? What group, what stakeholder? How do I have access to the individuals I need at the table? And then you can only be included if you are invited. So I had a professor in college who said, Mary, as you go through your professional career, remember, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And so when leaders are able to ask, what stakeholders am I putting on the menu with this decision, with this program, with this initiative? It's really huge because if you ask yourself, is everyone being respected in this room? Is everyone being reflected in this room? And is everyone expected in this room? You can attach those to the global trends. And when it comes to technology, ask yourself the three questions. When it comes to recruitment and retention, ask yourself those questions. And last but not least, the social impact. So when we think about the civil and civic and equality movements, is everybody being respected, reflected, and expected, even in the language and how we output with those things as well?
I have one of these moments on literally every one of these sessions I get to, and I hear a lot of stuff. I hear a lot of it, kind of ad nauseum, which is great. We need to be sharing these resources, but you just completely like short circuited my synapses with this idea of if you're not on the guest list, you're on the menu.
Absolutely.
That is amazing. So thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. You're right. It's a really good way to look at this in, kind of come at it from a different perspective. Because it can
Absolutely.
feel, especially if you're in a leadership roles are, already a fraught position, but
Yes.
being told that the way you're leading isn't helpful to everyone can feel like, okay, but how do I make it helpful to everyone? And that can feel
Right.
very stressful and very hard. But you're right. If you think about it in terms of who are you not thinking of? Who is not
Yes.
being represented here? then you're kind of narrowing it a lot more, right? You're able to sort
Absolutely.
of get control of the issue.
Absolutely. And I know that that phrase, like diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked. Yes, we say that all the time. But when we go deeper, Daniel Duday did a great article and he said, let's spin that on its head and let's shift it to diversity is going to the party. Inclusion is being a part of the party planning committee, because then you're able to say, what are some things that I can do? What are the foods I need to serve? What's the music that I want to hear? When you put people in a place to really be able to elevate their voice for the organization, for the programs, initiatives, and groups that are being reflected in the program, you'll get so much insight because it's from the people by the people.
Absolutely. I'm checking the chat over here. I'm seeing some people with great comments. So thank you so much for those, y'all. Keep sending them in. All right. Let's talk a little bit about the leadership gaps. Okay. So when it comes to areas of bias, socioeconomics, technology,
Yeah.
what are those critical gaps that need to be faced, as we sit here now?
Absolutely. I'll say the biggest one that we have going on right now when it comes to implicit and unconscious bias is that we have a bias conscious leadership gap. So we have really elevated this idea of self-care, that all leaders need to take care of themselves. All leaders need to do the things that pour back into themselves. And I think that that's great, but I feel like that's the first foundational level. When it comes to addressing bias consciousness, we need to move from self-care to self-awareness. And when you're aware, you're constantly asking yourself, what are my blind spots? But you're not just reflecting by yourself, you're taking your personal leadership board, the 5 people that you communicate with, collaborate with, and connect with the most, and you're saying, what are some things I'm doing that may be polarizing other individuals? What are decisions I've made that maybe weren't the best reflection of groups and entities and demographics in the organization? What are some things that we can do to position our company in a way to glean more of this information? So when we have more leaders that dig into their blind spots, we're really going to start to see that conscious bias gap really start to decrease because leaders are really internal with themselves. Alongside that, we also still have the gender leadership gap, asking conversations about how we come together in terms of representation to ensure that voices are being elevated, movements are being elevated. And that really ties into even how we recruit. So working with leaders who really say, look at this job description. Are we polarizing? Are we making sure that we're not disenfranchising any individual, whether it be gender, whether it be age, whether it be cultural, religious entities, and ensuring that we are opening our space for all to get that top talent in? And then last but not least, the equity gap. That is still a huge trend when it comes to not only pay disparities, but also really thinking about representation for our clients and ensuring that when we go out to recruit, are we sending out those individuals who represent those ideal top talents so that they can see that those individuals are in our organizations, that they're thriving, and that they're being a true voice for our mission, goals, and values?
Yeah. Okay. So personal question here,
Yeah,
or at least just something I was thinking about as you were talking.
absolutely.
We're talking about most of this from kind of the idea of that leadership role, right? Of what the
Mhm.
leaders really need to be doing.
Absolutely.
If we were to see more of what you're suggesting, in terms of leaders, kind of trying to identify where their conscious and unconscious biases are, identify where the gaps are in their leadership,
Yes.
what would you expect to see come as a result of that? Do you see it more as impacting the org, or do you see it more as impacting the workers under that person?
I definitely say the workers that are really, so we really have to move from this top bottom to grassroots and think up. So one of the things I always say, and I talk with leaders about this all the time, is with any program initiative, any diversity training or workshop, are you including your administrative assistants? Are you including your custodial staff? Are you including your entry level? Why? They are usually the first face and the first voice of the organization. Being able to communicate with clarity what your organization stands for really means that that CEO who may not have that touch time, or that COO who may not have that face time with the general populace or the clients normally, you want to make sure that grassroots or entry level all the way up, that they are armed with all of the information, the vocabulary, and the long-term and short-term milestones that need to be achieved, that's where you're going to start to see the most traction. A lot of times, those conversations you're talking about only stay in the boardroom, but you have to have a clear communication plan that trickles all the way down to every stakeholder who's touching your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'm kind of reminded myself of, a job that I had several years ago where we were, you get given things like, right, you have like your PTO earn or accrue over time and all this stuff. But it wasn't until I saw, someone who was in a supervisory position over me, not only
Mhm.
take their PTO, but be completely upfront and honest of like, hey, I need a mental health day. I'm going to go
Yes,
take this PTO. I will be back tomorrow to handle, all of these things that we have kind of going on. But
absolutely.
this is what I need to do to recharge my battery so that I can keep running the team effectively. That was a
Exactly.
game changer for me because whether or not you
Yes.
aspire to leadership, see you are a role model. Like if you are in a
Yes.
position of leading people, you are a role model, whether those people want to be where you are or not. You're showing them how
Absolutely.
to function within this micro dynamic. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely, Meg. When leaders are able to model what they expect, then that makes it so much easier for employees and for other individuals within the organization to have the permission to be whatever that is, whether it's the permission to be mentally okay, whether it's the permission to take that time to dig into family or maybe other personal endeavors that are connected to social impact. When the leader is able to do it, it sort of takes that and alleviates, it decreases just that anxiety that we sometimes put on ourselves to simply perform. And right now, right in a global pandemic, with all of the things that we are dealing with just as humans, it's necessary that we not only walk the walk, but we talk the talk as well. Those two things have to come together in leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. We're getting some great comments in the chat over
Okay.
here. Putera Camaro had shared, yes, that space for a safe support is key. There are
Huge.
also those out there who may have been out of the workforce since before the pandemic, and the
Absolutely.
remote and virtual transition will be a completely huge shift for those individuals as well.
Huge.
Putera had asked, are there resources to help those individuals through that transition process, or any guidelines on how to create those transition programs internally? So what do you recommend for companies or for individuals who are facing this huge paradigm shift?
Absolutely. So I believe it starts with recruitment and onboarding. And I tell leaders this all the time, whether they're about to interview and they're a part of the interview panel or whether they're going for the job. It has to be a two-way interview. So asking questions at the end is critical, doing your research, but maybe perhaps saying before you sign on or sign that contract with an organization and say, how are you supporting your employees when it comes to emotional well-being? Maybe you've been a stay-at-home mom. Maybe you are coming into an area where you gleaned certifications during the pandemic, and now this is a brand new workspace for you. Say, can I speak to maybe some individuals who may have onboarded during the pandemic and just talk to them about their experience? Or perhaps you could share some success stories. Also ask about the challenges. Non-examples are really important. What challenges have you faced as an organization when it comes to the technological transition or even industry transition? And how did you face that? Who did you bring to the table? And who are some key stakeholders that were a part of that decision making? That can give you a lot of information. Then throughout that onboarding, I'm always talking with leaders as well as HR panels and saying, think about your interview process. Do you have the individuals at the table that this organization or this individual will be working alongside? That opens up a space for people to really ask deeper questions, as well as really thinking about, you may have had stay-at-home moms who are transitioning back. And that's why it's so important to look at that job description. Are you looking at the heart and soul of the person and then making sure that there's an onboarding process to teach them those tech skills, to teach them those programs that are specific to your organization? Because what we really want are people who are committed to the work. Teaching them the tech skills are things that we can glean over time. So really doing some backwards planning and not looking perhaps for the whole package, but really thinking about who has the best success for longevity and sustainability when it comes to this specific role is huge.
Yes, yes. Oh my gosh, 1,000 times yes. Thank you. We're getting more questions in from the
Okay.
chat, so we're going to try and keep getting through those. We have less
Okay.
than 10 minutes left because
Okay.
these always go so quickly. Okay, so let's also talk about some of those gaps in the company or
Yes.
in a community. what strategies can these orgs use to assess themselves and then
Yeah.
address and alleviate those gaps?
Absolutely. So there's a couple. The first is when we think about DE&I overarchingly, and when we start to think about recruitment especially, we have to, again, I'm going back to traditional leadership language, we have to abandon lazy DE&I language. What do I mean by that? If we tell our individuals and our employees that we're going to another training, another workshop, you have to have that so deeply tied to an organizational mission, goal, or value, and also share the steps. So don't just invite employees, tell them this is deeply connected to this organizational goal. And over the next couple of months, over the next quarter, this is what you're going to see. What you're doing is you're communicating accountability to your individuals. And you're not just saying this is a one-stop shop. This is not a revival where you feel really good and then we're not going to mention it anymore. That is going to show that you have a sustainable and actionable plan. The other thing I talk about with organizations is commit to one or two strategies. You are not going to be able to solve implicit bias, unconscious bias, and think about all the different types of racism and diversity initiatives all in one shebang. By committing to one or two, that helps you master those things versus being mediocre at 7 or 8 strategies. Also, taking time to authentically celebrate the small wins and milestones throughout that is going to be critical as well. The other thing that we've seen, and that kind of bakes into our global mega trend, is we've seen organizations increase their tech use by 900% over the past 2 years. So organizations must establish their true tech north. What do we as an organization want to stand for? Do we want to master Microsoft? Do we want to master Google Suite versus throwing all of these different tech resources and tools at our employees and our clients? How can we get good at and master one of them so that it's seamless from our entry level all the way to our C-suite? And then when you're able to do that, you can authentically engage everyone in that process.
I love that idea of having, kind of having that goal in mind. And you're right, a lot of this is going to be uncharted territory for a lot of companies because you kind of feel like, well, we talk about collaboration. So of course we're all here for each other. Or we talk about, like a team mentality. And it's like, okay, yeah, you can be on this team, but not everybody's going to come to it with the same like basic supplies. Not everybody is issued a uniform or the equipment they need or have practice time and all that kind of stuff. But I love that idea of not only anchoring it to your company's values, but also acknowledging that like this is a very long journey. And I'm going to show you how this ties into something that we have visibility on now, but we're always going to keep moving towards that goal that's up ahead in the distance that might still be kind of a little nebulous, a little fuzzy at the edges, but it's that idea of true inclusivity, true belonging, true equity for people.
Absolutely, Meg. Absolutely. And to also be transparent, like you said, that this is going to be in perpetual beta. There are things that are being rendered defunct and also things that are being created in DE&I every single day. So in order for them to understand, we all need that flexibility and that grace, but we need to be accountable for those milestones.
Yes. I love this idea of accountability. It was actually a question that came up in the chat thread. Sally had asked, how do we determine whether those we hope to be respecting, reflecting, and expecting, in fact, feel those things? How do we define those areas of inclusion? And do you have recommendations for tactfully following up to ensure that we've accomplished what we hoped to, or how we can make changes accordingly? Okay, so let's talk about that follow-up.
Absolutely. So I've created this process called the 1-minute meeting. All right, there we go. It's literally 60 seconds with each of your individuals to ask them 3 critical questions. How do you feel you're showing up? What is one celebration you have from this initiative, quarter, or project? And what's one challenge that we can help you navigate better? After you've had the full-scale implementation of the program, the initiative, or the goal, really going back and asking your individuals what they're thinking and what they're experiencing, and then taking those responses back to the leadership team is critical, because then you're able, again, perpetual beta, to ebb and flow. Do we need more of this? Do we feel as if we've mastered this? Mastery is 80 to 90% of your individuals are showing up in its habits. So when we think about DE&I, it's not something that you're going to just walk into an organization organization say, you know what, by George, I think we've got it. No, it is your daily habits and interactions with stakeholders from, again, entry level to C-suite, thinking about how we comport ourselves, how we show up, how we model, and that's how you're going to know. One thing I always encourage organizations to really look into is the IDI continuum. It's the intercultural development continuum. And it's an assessment that helps your organization understand, listen, do we have more individuals in denial? Do we have an organization of polarization? An organization that breeds minimization of DE&I issues? Do we have an organization of acceptance, or do we adapt? And when you're really able to see where you're at on the continuum, that really helps you think about where your next steps are. You have to understand where you are in order to chart out where you're going.
Yeah, you got to orient yourself. You got to figure out,
Absolutely.
what is the lay of the land? Are you on a precipice, or are you in the middle of a very, very vast, field,
Yes.
savanna, whatever you want to call
And
it? Yeah, you
exactly.
got to find, you have to figure out where you want to go. Um,
Absolutely.
we are getting a lot of people in the chat thread asking if you have resources that you recommend for things like this. If you
Yes.
have any, please feel free. If not, where should people start with their research, or start, kind of looking for these resources?
Absolutely. There are a lot of free resources. Again, the IDI continuum is absolutely amazing. There's also gender decoders that you can download. So you can take job descriptions from your organization and put these into those gender decoders. It will tell you, okay, there's some gender neutral language that you need to shift here. There's some cultural language that you need to shift here. And then one of the best books that I've seen over the course of my time, just really kind of thinking about over the past 2 years, is a text. I have it here. Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Dummies. It's really, really good, and it's written by one of the biggest global change agents, Dr. Shirley Davis. It has everything in here from strategic planning and management to thinking about how you can engage DE&I experts along every level. It's absolutely like my go-to DE&I Bible.
I love that. It's one of those things. You're like the second person to mention the For Dummies series to me in like the last probably 2-3 weeks, and I'm
Uh-huh.
so glad that it's still kind of a thing, because I
It is.
remember those from when I was in like grade school. They started getting like huge, so I remember
Yes.
these, and it's so great to have that kind of touchstone to refer back to.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We are at time, but I just want to thank you for your time here, and then
Thank you
also
so
ask,
much.
where can people follow up with you, and learn more and see what you're doing.
Absolutely. Please follow me on LinkedIn at Dr. Mary Hemphill, or you can go to my website, www.bealimitlessleader.com, and that has all my social media outreach and professional development.